So first, to start off, the affirmative said that we're looking this as an eye for an eye basis, and this is not true. In fact, the death penalty for juveniles was abolished a while ago. We're talking about juvenile life without parole. So with the issue regarding rehabilitation, juveniles are given the opportunity. That's why we have juvenile courts. And they come with lesser punishments. Currently, there are 2 pending cases that are asking the court to do later reviews, which is what the affirmative was talking about. And Christopher Slobing, a juvenile justice expert at Vanderbilt Law School, wondered about what the next step might be for a court majority that thinks that the immaturity and impetuous behavior of juveniles, as well as their potential for reform, makes them different from adults. The next step might be no mandatory sentences for children at all. Without mandatory sentences, there is no longer a deterrent, which obviously is an issue. That's why, if juveniles committing these crimes is so high right now, we can only imagine what it'll be once we take away juvenile or life without parole as an option. When the affirmative says that juveniles don't understand their crimes, they don't consider that most of the, they don't consider that these, they don't consider how children do see violence in the media. According to an article by Time magazine, should the law treat kids as adults kids and adults differently? It's absurd to argue that the modern child who sees the effect of violence around him in the news every day doesn't understand what killing really is. The fact that child killers know how to load and shoot a gun is an indicator that they understand exactly what they are doing. When we think of traditional 13 to 14-year-olds, we aren't thinking of, we're not considering the same people that are committing these crimes. These kids know what they're doing. They usually have a background of committing crimes, and that brings me to another point. A lot of, fewer than half of serious, or ABC News reported that fewer than half of serious violent crimes by juveniles are reported to law enforcement. The Justice Department estimates that 10% of all homicides are committed by juveniles under the age of 18. Nearly every year, the FBI arrests more than 33,000 young adults under the age of 18 for the offenses, which means that California has one of the highest levels of juveniles life without parole. Juveniles are given a chance. This brings me to another point. According to the New York Times, in an article titled When to Punish Young Offenders and When to Rehabilitate, they found that the overwhelming majority of juvenile crimes, from petty vandalism to violent homicide, are handled by the juvenile justice system, not adult courts, which is where these life sentences come from. The separation of these 2 systems is a recognition of the differences between juveniles and adults, and offers juveniles by default greater opportunities for forgiveness and redemption. Juvenile courts exist in large part to rehabilitate the youth who have done wrong. The juveniles that are facing life without parole aren't committing the crimes that they see in the juvenile courts. The juvenile court still deals with homicide, but the juveniles that are going to life without parole, that are going to adult courts and thereby facing life without parole, they're completely different crimes. Well, they're not different, but they're worse. According to another article by Time magazine, the end result of a heinous crime remains the same, no matter who commits it. Our justice system depends on upholding the perpetrators responsible for their actions. A crime is a crime regardless of who commits it. If a 13-year-old commits a violent crime, a crime violent enough, he should be eligible for the same punishment that an adult can face. Without life sentences, the only people who really suffer are the families of the victim and the victim. In an article titled "Life Without Parole for Juveniles: How Teenagers Grow Old in Prison," many victims and families affected by juvenile violence argue that creating an exception for minors in mandatory sentencing would rob victims of their rights, claiming that minors know right from wrong and have the mental capacity to make appropriate decisions. When we forego life without parole for juveniles, we're disregarding the pain that families face, and we make the punishment greater for the victims' families other than the perpetrators of the crime. Juveniles are well aware of the crime or of what they are doing. This is evident when we see that on average, juveniles were involved in 1/4 of all serious violent victimizations, not including murder, committed annually over the last 25 years. One of the last things that the state argues is that life without parole is a sufficiently severe sentence that will deter at least some juveniles from committing murder.